The story begins on a bustling subway train in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. It's one of those typical weekday afternoons when people are rushing home from work, school, or errands. The train is packed with passengers, some standing, clutching the overhead rails while others sit slouched in their seats, tired from the day's grind. Among them is Greg, a tall and burly man who steps onto the train at the previous station. He's loud, obnoxious, and clearly not sober. His presence fills the car almost instantly, like a storm cloud rolling into an otherwise calm sky. Greg wears a leather jacket that looks like it hasn't been washed in weeks, paired with scuffed boots and jeans stained with grease. His unkempt beard and wild eyes make him look even more intimidating. As he pushes his way through the crowded aisle, bumping into people without apology, murmurs of discomfort ripple through the passengers. No one says anything outright, but everyone feels it, the tension thickening as Greg moves closer to the center of the train. He finally settles into a seat near the middle of the car, right across from a woman named Sarah. She's petite, with long dark hair tucked behind her ears, and she's wearing oversized sunglasses despite being indoors. Her posture is hunched slightly forward, as if she's trying to shrink herself and avoid notice. In her lap rests a small purse, which she clutches tightly with both hands. Something about her demeanor suggests she's uneasy, maybe even afraid, though no one knows why yet. Sarah keeps her head down, staring intently at the floor as if willing herself to blend into the background. But Greg notices her immediately. Maybe it's because she's so quiet, or maybe it's because she seems out of place compared to the rest of the noisy, chaotic crowd. Whatever the reason, Greg zeroes in on her like a predator spotting its prey. At first, he doesn't say anything. Instead, he leans back in his seat, crossing his arms over his chest and lets his gaze linger on her for a few moments longer than necessary. The other passengers can feel the energy shift. Some glance nervously between Greg and Sarah, silently, hoping nothing will happen. Others bury themselves deeper into their phones or books, pretending not to notice. But Greg isn't the kind of person to let things slide. After a minute or two of silence, he clears his throat loudly, a sound that echoes through the train car, and speaks up. "Hey lady," he says, his voice dripping with mockery. "Why you so quiet? You think you're too good for us?" His words hang in the air, sharp and cutting. For a brief moment, the entire train goes still. Even the hum of the engine seems to fade into the background as everyone waits to see how Sarah will respond. But she doesn't respond. Not immediately. Anyway, she stays perfectly still, her grip tightening ever so slightly on her purse. Greg takes her silence as a challenge. He leans forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and smirks. "Come on, don't be shy," he goads her, raising his voice just enough to draw even more attention. "We're all friends here, ain't we?" A few people nearby exchange awkward glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. One older man shakes his head subtly, muttering something under his breath about troublemakers. A young woman sitting diagonally from Sarah shifts uncomfortably in her seat, clearly wanting to say something but holding back. As the seconds tick by, Greg grows increasingly annoyed by Sarah's lack of reaction. He expected her to snap back, cry, or at least show some sign of fear. But instead she remains eerily calm, almost as if she's unfazed by his antics. This only fuels his frustration further. Leaning back again, he starts making snide comments about the other passengers, laughing loudly at his own jokes and gesturing wildly with his hands. He mocks a teenager's hoodie, teases a businessman's tie, and even points at a mother holding a baby saying, "Bet that kid's gonna grow up ugly like you." Despite his attempts to provoke a reaction from anyone within earshot, most people continue to ignore him. All except Sarah, that is. Though she hasn't said a word, Greg can't seem to stop fixating on her. There's something about the way she sits there completely composed that irritates him to no end. He wants to break her composure, to force her to acknowledge him somehow, and so he doubles down on his efforts, determined to get a rise out of her. "You know what your problem is?" he says suddenly, leaning forward again. His tone has shifted now, becoming more aggressive. "You're stuck up. That's what you are. Sitting there all high and mighty, thinking you're better than everybody else. Still, Sarah doesn't respond. She doesn't even flinch. Instead, she adjusts her sunglasses slightly, as if to block him out entirely. This small action sends Greg over the edge. He slams his fist against the metal pole beside him, causing several passengers to jump in surprise. "What's wrong with you?" he barks, his voice rising above the din of the train. "Can't you hear me talking to you, or are you deaf too?" By now, the entire car is watching the scene unfold, though no one dares to step in. Some look away, ashamed of their inaction, while others glance around nervously, wondering if someone else will intervene. But Greg isn't interested in them anymore. His focus is solely on Sarah, who continues to sit quietly, seemingly unaffected by his tirade. And then, just as the train approaches the next station, Greg decides to take things a step further. He reaches out and grabs Sarah's wrist, yanking her arm toward him. The sudden movement causes her purse to slip off her lap and land on the floor with a soft thud. Gasps erupt from the surrounding passengers, and for the first time, Sarah reacts. Slowly, deliberately, she raises her head and meets Greg's gaze. Behind her sunglasses, her eyes burn with an intensity that makes him falter, if only for a split second. But before either of them can say another word, the train jerks to a halt, throwing everyone off balance. Doors slide open and a wave of new passengers floods into the car, momentarily distracting Greg. He releases Sarah's wrist and leans back in his seat, sneering at her one last time before turning his attention elsewhere. Little does he know, this is only the beginning of what will soon become the most unforgettable and humbling day of his life. Greg's temper is like a simmering pot, and it's about to boil over. After his initial outburst, he doesn't let up. If anything, he becomes even more relentless in his attempts to provoke Sarah. The train rattles along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter doing little to drown out Greg's loud voice. He leans forward again, this time closer than before, invading Sarah's personal space with an arrogance that makes the other passengers squirm in their seats. "Come on, lady," he sneers, his tone dripping with mockery. "You deaf or something? I'm talking to you." His words are sharp, designed to cut through her silence and force her to react. But Sarah remains still, her posture unchanged. She doesn't look at him. She doesn't even flinch. Her calm demeanor seems to infuriate Greg even more. To him, her refusal to engage feels like a challenge, one he can't back down from without losing face in front of the other passengers. Greg starts circling his verbal attacks, not just focusing on Sarah but now mocking others around him too. He points at a teenager with headphones plugged into his ears and says, "Hey kid, turn that racket down. Nobody wants to hear your nonsense." When the teenager quickly lowers the volume, Greg smirks triumphantly, as if proving a point. Then he turns his attention to a middle-aged man reading a newspaper. "And what's with you?" Greg jeers. "Still living in the Stone Age? Get yourself a phone like everyone else." The insults keep coming, one after another, each more biting than the last. Some passengers try to ignore him, burying their faces deeper into their books or phones. Others exchange nervous glances, silently urging someone, anyone, to step in and stop this escalating situation. But no one does. Fear keeps them rooted in their seats, unwilling to confront the volatile man who towers over them all. Yet, despite his broadening targets, Greg's focus always returns to Sarah. She's the epicenter of his frustration, the one person who refuses to give him the reaction he craves. Every time he looks at her, his irritation grows. Finally, he snaps. "Take those glasses off," he demands, leaning so far forward that his face is inches from hers. "What's wrong with you? Hiding behind those shades like some kind of movie star?" Sarah hesitates for a moment, her fingers brushing lightly against the frames of her sunglasses. For a split second, it seems like she might comply. But then she stops, her hand dropping back to her lap. This small act of defiance sends Greg into a rage. "I said take them off," he barks, his voice echoing through the train car. The harshness of his tone causes a few passengers to gasp audibly. Even those who had been pretending not to notice can no longer ignore the tension building in the air. Reluctantly, Sarah lifts her hands to her face and removes her sunglasses. As she does, the truth comes into view. There's a bruise near her temple, a faint but unmistakable mark of recent trauma. It's not fresh enough to suggest it happened today, but it's clear enough to make people wonder. The sight of it momentarily stuns Greg, though not because he feels sympathy. Instead, his lips curl into a cruel smile. "Oh, look at that," he taunts, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did someone already beat me to it? Guess I'm not the first guy to put you in your place." The comment lands like a punch, heavy and cruel. Sarah's expression doesn't change, but there's a flicker in her eyes, a brief flash of emotion that vanishes almost as quickly as it appears. Around them, the passengers shift uncomfortably. A young woman sitting nearby whispers to her, "Friend, that's so messed up." An older man shakes his head disapprovingly, muttering under his breath about how some people have no decency, but none of them dare to speak up, afraid of becoming Greg's next target. Embarrassed by his own lack of control, Greg doubles down on his aggression. "So what's the deal?" he asks, his tone shifting from mocking to outright hostile. "You got a boyfriend who likes to rough you up? Or maybe you're just clumsy, huh? Can't even walk straight without running into trouble." Each word is like a dagger aimed directly at Sarah's dignity. Yet she continues to sit there, unmoving, unflinching. Her composure is maddening to Greg, who thrives on chaos and conflict. "You know what your problem is?" he continues, leaning even closer. "You think you're better than everyone else. Sitting there all quiet, acting like you're untouchable. Well, newsflash, sweetheart, you're nothing special." With that, he reaches out and shoves her shoulder hard enough to knock her sideways. The sudden movement startles everyone in the car. Gasps erupt, followed by murmurs of shock and outrage. A mother shields her child's eyes, while a businessman clenches his fists, visibly struggling with whether or not to intervene. But Sarah doesn't cry out or retaliate. Instead, she steadies herself, her jaw tightening slightly as she rights her posture. She adjusts her glasses, which had slipped during the shove, and fixes Greg with a steady gaze. For the first time since he began his tirade, there's a hint of steel in her expression. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there. A quiet strength that hints at something beneath the surface. Greg notices it too. For a brief moment, his bravado falters. He's used to people crumbling under his intimidation tactics, breaking down in tears or lashing out in anger. But Sarah isn't like the others. There's something about her, the way she carries herself, the quiet confidence in her eyes, that throws him off balance, and then, as if sensing his uncertainty, she speaks. "You really don't want to do this," she says, her voice low and measured. The words are simple, yet they carry an undeniable weight. Greg blinks, caught off guard by the sudden sound of her voice. He wasn't expecting her to speak, let alone with such authority. "What did you say?" he asks, his tone laced with disbelief. Sarah repeats herself, louder this time. "I said you don't want to mess with me." Her warning hangs in the air, heavy and foreboding. Greg stares at her, his mind racing. Is she bluffing, trying to scare him off with empty threats? Or is there something more to her words? He narrows his eyes, studying her face for any sign of weakness. But Sarah gives him nothing. She sits there, composed and unwavering, as if daring him to call her bluff. For a moment, Greg considers backing down. The atmosphere in the train car has shifted dramatically. What started as a spectacle of bullying has now become something darker, more intense. The other passengers watch with bated breath, unsure of what will happen next. Will Greg escalate further, or will he retreat? Either way, one thing is certain. Sarah isn't going to be an easy target, and deep down, Greg knows it. Greg's blood boils at Sarah's warning. Her calm demeanor and steady voice only fuel his frustration further. He's used to people cowering before him, their fear feeding his ego. But here she is, this small, seemingly fragile woman, staring him down as if he's nothing more than an inconvenience. It doesn't sit well with him. In fact, it makes him angrier than ever. "What did you just say to me?" Greg growls, leaning forward again. His face twists into a sneer, his eyes narrowing as he tries to intimidate her. "You think you can threaten me Seriously? The sarcasm in his tone drips like venom, but Sarah doesn't flinch. She sits perfectly still, her hands resting on her lap, her expression unreadable behind her sunglasses. Her silence infuriates Greg even more. To him, it feels like she's mocking him without saying a word. The train rattles along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter doing little to ease the tension that has gripped the car. Passengers exchange nervous glances, some whispering quietly to one another while others pretend not to notice. A young mother holds her child closer, shielding them from the escalating conflict. An elderly man mutters under his breath about how society has gone downhill, though no one pays him any attention. Everyone knows this situation could explode at any moment, yet no one dares to intervene. Greg decides to push harder. "Oh, come on," he says, his voice rising above the hum of conversation in the train. "You think you're tough now, hiding behind those shades and acting all mysterious? Let me tell you something, sweetheart. You're not fooling anyone." He leans back in his seat, crossing his arms over his chest as if to assert dominance. "So why don't you stop playing games and tell me what you meant by that little comment of yours?" Sarah doesn't respond immediately. Instead, she adjusts her sunglasses slightly, ensuring they sit perfectly on her nose. Her movements are deliberate, almost calculated, as if she's trying to unnerve him further. And it works. Greg watches her every move, his jaw tightening with each passing second. Finally, she speaks, her voice low and steady. "I already told you," she says, meeting his gaze directly. "You don't want to mess with me." Her words hit him like a challenge, a dare he can't ignore. Greg scoffs loudly, throwing his head back in exaggerated laughter. "Oh, please," he says, rolling his eyes. "What are you going to do? Call your daddy? Or maybe your boyfriend will show up and save you." He gestures dramatically around the train car, inviting the other passengers to join in his ridicule. Some look away, uncomfortably, while others avoid eye contact altogether. No one laughs along with him, but Sarah isn't fazed. If anything, she seems amused by his theatrics. A faint smile tugs at the corners of her lips, though it never fully forms. She tilts her head slightly, studying him as if he's some kind of amusing spectacle. "You really shouldn't underestimate me," she says softly, her tone carrying an edge that sends a chill through the air. For a moment, Greg hesitates. There's something about the way she says it, calm, confident, almost playful, that throws him off balance. It's as if she knows something he doesn't. "Underestimate you?" Greg repeats, his voice dripping with mockery. "Lady, I've seen scarier things in my cereal bowl." He chuckles at his own joke, clearly proud of himself for coming up with such a clever line. But Sarah doesn't react. She simply continues to stare at him, her expression unchanged. Around them, the passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that the confrontation is far from over. Greg decides to take matters into his own hands. He reaches out and grabs Sarah's wrist again, this time with more force than before. "Let's see how tough you are when someone actually fights. Back," he snarls, pulling her arm toward him. The movement is sudden and aggressive, causing several passengers to gasp audibly. A few stand up halfway as if preparing to intervene, but quickly sit back down when Greg glares at them. Fear keeps them rooted in place, unwilling to step between him and his target. Sarah winces slightly as his grip tightens around her wrist, but she doesn't cry out or beg for mercy. Instead, she meets his gaze head-on, her eyes blazing with quiet defiance. "Last chance," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let go of me." Greg laughs derisively, clearly enjoying the power he thinks he holds over her. "Or what?" he taunts. "What are you going to do, huh? Cry? Scream? Go ahead, I'm waiting." And then, something unexpected happens. Sarah smiles. It's not a warm or friendly smile, it's cold, calculating and utterly devoid of fear. "Fine," she says, her tone icy. "Don't say I didn't warn you." With that, she pulls her phone out of her purse with her free hand, her movements swift and precise. She taps the screen a few times, sending a message without taking her eyes off Greg. Then she slips the phone back into her bag and leans back in her seat, her posture relaxed and composed. Greg stares at her, momentarily confused. What was that? He demands, loosening his grip slightly. Who are you texting? Your mom? Your imaginary boyfriend? Sarah doesn't answer. Instead, she tilts her head slightly, as if listening for something. The train begins to slow down as it approaches the next station, the screech of brakes filling the air. Doors slide open and a fresh wave of passengers steps inside, momentarily distracting everyone. But Greg doesn't let go. He's too angry, too invested in proving his superiority. Answer me, he barks, shaking her wrist slightly. That's when Sarah speaks again, her voice calm but firm. My husband, she says simply. The word hangs in the air, heavy and loaded with meaning. Greg blinks, caught off guard by her response. Your husband? He repeats, his tone laced with disbelief. Yeah, right, like you're married to some big shot. Sarah doesn't argue. She simply nods, her expression unreadable. Believe whatever you want, she says. But when he gets here, you'll regret everything you've done today. Her confidence is unwavering, her words carrying a weight that shakes Greg to his core. For the first time since the confrontation began, he feels a flicker of doubt creeping into his mind. Could she be telling the truth? Is there really someone coming to defend her? Before he can dwell on it too long, a passenger nearby clears their throat nervously. Excuse me, the man says, holding up his phone. On the screen is a picture of Vin Diesel, the famous actor known for his muscular build and intimidating presence. Is this your husband? He asks, hesitantly glancing between the photo and Sarah. Greg freezes, his grip on her wrist slackening completely. His eyes widen as he looks at the image, then back at Sarah. Suddenly, pieces start falling into place. The resemblance between her social media posts and the actor, the bruise on her temple, her unshakable composure. Oh no, Greg whispers, his bravado crumbling like sandcastles against the tide. 恐慌开始在他心中蔓延. Greg's face goes pale as the reality of Sarah's words sinks in. Up until now, he had dismissed her warnings as empty threats, just another attempt to scare him off. But seeing that picture on the passenger's phone changes everything. The resemblance between Vin Diesel and Sarah is undeniable. And if there's one thing Greg knows about Vin Diesel, it's that the man isn't someone you want to cross. For a moment, the train car feels eerily silent, despite the hum of its engine, and the murmurs of passengers stepping on and off at the station. Greg stares at Sarah, his mind racing. He tries to convince himself that this is all some elaborate prank, but deep down he knows better. There's something about the way she carries herself, the quiet confidence, the unshakable composure, that screams authenticity. This isn't just an act, she's serious. You're lying, Greg blurts out, his voice trembling slightly. It's meant to sound defiant, but instead it comes across as desperate. You can't be married to him. He points accusingly at the phone screen, where Vin Diesel's familiar face stares back at him. The actor's chiseled jawline and muscular frame seem almost cartoonish in their perfection, a stark contrast to Greg's own scruffy appearance. Sarah doesn't respond immediately. Instead, she adjusts her sunglasses again, her movement slow and deliberate. When she finally speaks, her tone is calm but laced with authority. I told you not to underestimate me, she says, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. But here we are. Her words hang in the air, heavy with implication. Around them, passengers exchange nervous glances, some whispering quietly, while others pull out their phones to snap photos or record videos of the unfolding drama. Greg releases Sarah's wrist abruptly, backing away as if burned. His earlier bravado has vanished completely, replaced by sheer panic. No, wait, I didn't mean anything, he stammers, holding up his hands defensively. It was just a joke, I didn't know. His voice rises with each word, growing louder and more frantic. A few passengers nearby shift uncomfortably, sensing the shift in power dynamics. What started as a display of dominance has now become a full-blown meltdown. Sarah watches him silently, her expression unreadable behind her sunglasses. Despite his groveling, she doesn't soften. If anything, her demeanor grows colder. You should have thought about that before you decided to harass me, she says evenly. Her voice isn't loud, but it carries enough weight to silence everyone around them. Even the background noise of the train seems to fade into the distance as her words resonate through the car. Greg scrambles to salvage what little dignity he has left. Look, I'm sorry, okay? Really sorry, he pleads, his eyes darting around the train as if searching for an escape route. I'll leave you alone, I promise. Just don't tell him, all right? His desperation is palpable, drawing both pity and disdain from the other passengers. Some shake their heads in disgust while others watch with morbid fascination, unable to look away. But Sarah isn't done yet. Slowly, deliberately, she pulls her phone out of her purse again. This time, she doesn't hide it. She taps the screen a few times, her fingers moving quickly and confidently. Then she holds it up briefly so Greg can see. On the screen is a text message. On my way. Stay safe. Below the message is a photo of Vin Diesel, mid-workout, flexing his biceps in a tank top. The image is unmistakably recent, leaving no room for doubt. Greg's knees nearly buckle as he reads the message. Oh no, oh no, oh no, he mutters under his breath, pacing back and forth in the narrow aisle. His earlier aggression has been replaced by sheer terror. He looks at Sarah again, his eyes wide with fear. Please, please, you gotta help me, he begs, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I swear, I'll do anything. Sarah remains unfazed. She slips her phone back into her purse and leans back in her seat, crossing her legs casually. Her posture exudes control, as if she's orchestrating the entire situation with ease. You already did enough, she says coolly. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences. The train begins to slow down again as it approaches the next station. Passengers start gathering their belongings, preparing to disembark. But Greg doesn't move. He stands frozen in place, his body rigid with anxiety. As the doors slide open, two figures step onto the train. They're tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in matching black suits. Their presence commands immediate attention, and the crowd instinctively parts to let them through. One of the men scans the car briefly before zeroing in on Sarah. Ma'am, is everything okay? He asks, his voice deep and authoritative. Sarah nods, gesturing toward Greg. Without saying a word, the bodyguard turns his gaze to Greg, who immediately starts sweating profusely. That's him, Sarah says simply, her tone icy. He assaulted me. Without hesitation, the two bodyguards close in on Greg, grabbing him firmly by the arms. He struggles briefly, protesting loudly, but it's clear he's no match for their strength. Wait, you don't understand, it was a mistake, he yells, his voice cracking with desperation. I didn't know she was married to Vinny. Diesel, honest. The passengers erupt into murmurs as Greg is dragged off the train. Some cheer quietly, relieved to see justice served, while others film the scene on their phones, eager to share it online. Through it all, Sarah remains seated, her expression calm and composed. As the train doors close and the vehicle lurches forward, she adjusts her sunglasses once more and lets out a small sigh. For the first time since the confrontation began, she allows herself a faint smile. Around her, the atmosphere shifts. Tension gives way to relief, and whispers of admiration replace the earlier murmurs of fear. Someone nearby mutters, "Good for her," while another passenger nods in agreement. Though the ordeal is over, the memory of what just happened will linger long after the train reaches its final destination. As the train pulls away from the station, leaving Greg in the hands of Sarah's intimidating bodyguards, the car falls into a strange kind of silence. The passengers are still buzzing with disbelief over what just unfolded, but there's also a palpable sense of relief. It's as if the air has been cleared of its earlier tension, replaced by a mix of awe and curiosity about Sarah. Who is this woman? How did she manage to stay so composed during such an intense confrontation? And most importantly, what happens next? Sarah sits quietly in her seat, her sunglasses firmly in place. She adjusts her purse on her lap and smooths out the creases in her jacket, her movements calm and unhurried. To anyone watching, she appears completely unfazed by the events that just transpired. But beneath her cool exterior, there's a flicker of something, a mixture of satisfaction and weariness. Dealing with people like Greg isn't new to her. It's part of living life under the shadow of fame. Yet no matter how many times it happens, it never gets easier. The other passengers begin to relax too. Some return to their phones or books, while others whisper excitedly about what they witnessed. A young woman sitting across from Sarah leans over to her friend and says, "Can you believe that guy thought he could mess with her? He had no idea who he was messing with." Her friend nods enthusiastically, adding, "I mean, seriously, Vin Diesel? That's like picking a fight with Superman." Despite the chatter around her, Sarah remains focused. She pulls out her phone again and opens a messaging app. On the screen is a conversation thread labeled V, presumably short for Vin. The last message reads, "On my way. Stay safe." Sarah types back quickly, "All good now. Thanks for sending help." She hesitates for a moment before adding, "Love you." After hitting send, she slips the phone back into her purse and lets out another small sigh. Meanwhile, outside the train, chaos ensues at the station where Greg was removed. Passers-by gather around him, filming the scene as the two bodyguards hold him firmly in place. One of them speaks sternly into a walkie-talkie, relaying details to someone on the other end. Greg continues to protest loudly, his voice tinged with desperation. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know," he repeats over and over, his words blending into a frantic blur. Onlookers watch with a mix of amusement and disdain, some shaking their heads at his foolishness while others laugh openly. Back. On the train, the atmosphere shifts once more. People start approaching Sarah cautiously, eager to express their support. Or perhaps just to get a closer look at the woman married to one of Hollywood's biggest stars. An older man with a kind face clears his throat nervously and says, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you really married to Vin Diesel?" His tone is polite, almost reverent, as if he's addressing royalty. Sarah smiles faintly, though it doesn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes," she replies simply, her voice soft but firm. The man nods, clearly starstruck. "Wow, that must be incredible," he says, fumbling for words. Before Sarah can respond, a younger woman chimes in. "Did Vin send those guys to protect you?" she asks, gesturing toward the direction Greg was taken. Sarah nods again, her expression neutral. "He takes my safety very seriously," she explains, her tone carrying a hint of finality that discourages further questions. The attention doesn't stop there. More passengers join in, offering apologies for not stepping in earlier and expressing admiration for how Sarah handled the situation. "You were amazing," one woman says earnestly. "I don't think I could have stayed so calm." Another adds, "That guy got exactly what he deserved. Nobody messes with Vin Diesel's wife." Though Sarah appreciates their kindness, she seems eager to move past the incident. She politely thanks them for their concern but makes it clear she doesn't want to dwell on what happened. Instead, she focuses on the view outside the window, watching as the cityscape blurs past. The train rattles along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter providing a soothing backdrop to the lingering excitement inside the car. Eventually, the conversations die down, and the passengers settle back into their routines. Some resume reading or scrolling through their phones while others prepare to disembark at upcoming stops. But even as the initial buzz fades, whispers about Sarah continue to ripple through the crowd. By the time the train reaches her destination, nearly everyone on board knows who she is, and they're eager to share the story with friends, family, and social media followers. When Sarah finally stands to leave, the other passengers make way for her respectfully. There's no pushing or shoving this time. Instead, there's a quiet reverence as if they're witnessing history. As she steps off the train, her phone buzzes in her hand. She glances at the screen and sees a new message from V. "Glad you're okay. See you soon." For the first time since the ordeal began, Sarah allows herself a genuine smile. She tucks her phone into her pocket and walks briskly toward the exit, her head held high. Though the day has been exhausting, she feels a renewed sense of gratitude for her husband's unwavering support, for the protection he provides, and for the strength she's learned to cultivate in the face of adversity. As she disappears into the bustling crowd beyond the station, the passengers left behind can't help but marvel at what they've witnessed. For them, it's a story they'll tell for years to come. The day an ordinary train ride turned extraordinary because of one remarkable woman and her famous husband. And somewhere, far away, Vin Diesel receives updates about the incident, ready to ensure that justice is served, not just for today, but for every challenge his family might face in the future.